All right, guys, let's start one more session on Azure Administrator. In this particular session, we are basically going to understand about virtual networks. I'll introduce you guys to what is a virtual network, and we'll understand a couple of things what we can do with virtual networks, like how we can, how multiple resources, Azure resources, can communicate with each other, how the communication can be established with on-premises to Azure, how to filter network traffic, how to route network traffic. Okay, we'll also understand what is CIDR. We'll deep dive into what are subnets, what is the importance of subnets, and we'll understand about IP addresses. What is a private IP address? Why do we need a private IP address? What is a public IP address, and how different it is from private IP address, and why do we need that? And we'll also understand how to deploy a virtual machine in the virtual network that we have created, our own virtual network. So that is the agenda for this session. Okay, let's straight away start understanding about virtual networks. Why do we need virtual networks? Let me take to my whiteboard. All right, now it's very simple. A virtual network, we can simply define it as a building block. Okay, a virtual network can be defined as a building block to create your own network on Azure. What does that mean? Now let's consider if this is a Azure cloud. Okay, let's consider that is an Azure cloud. Inside Azure cloud, let us say I have a Azure account, so I can create, let's say I created two virtual machines. Now let's say there's some person X. Okay, he also created Azure account. So he can also create virtual machines, right? Obviously, he can also create because Azure is a private cloud. Now, if I want to create my own boundary, or if I want to create my own network on Azure cloud, we can use a resource by something called as a VNet. Okay, we can create something called as a VNet. VNet is very simply a virtual network. It is like creating our own boundary of resources, for the resources on Azure cloud. So with the help of VNet, it will enable communication between these virtual missions because they are in the same network. So we can also simply say it is like creating our traditional network that we operate on our data center, but Azure comes with like additional benefits like availability, isolation, scaling, etc. Okay, to summarize, Azure Virtual Networks enables Azure resources to securely communicate with each other. Okay, and it will help to connect with resources like virtual machines on premises with the help of internet. Okay, and it also does the filtering of network traffic. It also routes the traffic. It also does the integration with other services. Okay, Azure virtual networks are like creating our own network on Azure cloud so that our resources will be isolated from other resources. This is a virtual machine for another user, but I don't want this one to communicate with this my virtual machine. Then what I can do, I can create my boundary by using Azure virtual network. Now there are a lot of other advantages. One of the advantages is that by using Azure virtual networks, what we can do, we can we can communicate between Azure resources. How? Okay, let us see. There are multiple options here. How we can establish communication between resources. One of them is how we can communicate between Azure resources. Okay. One of them is by simply through a virtual network. Okay, through a virtual network. Second one is through a virtual network service endpoint. Okay, and the third way is something called as VNet pairing. Okay, these are the three ways how we can establish communication between the resources which are there on uh, Azure cloud. So let us see what is this through a virtual network. Okay, let me put that. So now let's say with the help of virtual network, now both these resources are there in the same network, right? So we can establish this, can establish communication with this. Now let's say there is another VNet. Okay, let's say this is another VNet. Okay, in this also there's a virtual machine. By default, this is in a different VNet, this is in a different VNet, right? This server cannot be will not be able to establish communication with this server. But if I want this server to establish this communication with this server, what we can do is that we can create a link. This one we call it as VNet peering. Okay, with the help of VNet pairing, we can establish communication between resources which are part of multiple VNets. Okay. Now let's say there is a Azure blob storage. Okay, this is not part of this VNet. Okay, there is Azure blob storage or a storage account which is not part of any of the VNets. Now, if I want this virtual machine to communicate with this blob storage, we can create something called as a service endpoint. Service endpoint. So, with the help of this service endpoint, we can establish communication with the virtual machine. So, this is also one of the feature of Azure VNet. Okay. So, we can establish communication between Azure resources with the help of a virtual network or with a service endpoint or with a VNet peering. Now, what else we can do with this? We can also create something called as like a communication with resources outside of Azure. Now, if you look into this diagram here, now the communication between these two virtual machines, they are inside Azure, right? And this is also on a different VNet, but this is also inside Azure. Now, this storage is also inside Azure only. But can we establish communication between the on premises and Azure? Yes, we can do that. Okay. Now, let's say communication between on prem to Azure. Okay. Yes, we can do that. And it can happen in multiple ways. One of the ways is called as point to site. Okay. It is called as point to site VPN. VPN stands for virtual private network. And the second way is basically called as uh, second way is called as site to site VPN. Okay, we'll discuss this in detail in next chapter, but I just want you guys to introduce the terminology. Okay, one is called as point to site VPN, second one is called as site to site VPN, and third one is called as Azure Express route. Okay, these are the three ways how we can establish communication between on premises to Azure cloud. All right. Now let me explain you on the image. Now let's say, let me go to this image here. Now this is all on the cloud, right? Now let us say I have my own data center. Okay, my own data center is there outside Azure. I have a virtual machine here. Okay, let's say this is my virtual machine. And if I have to communicate with this server, okay, let's say I want to communicate from this server to this server. How I can do that? There are three ways. One is called as point to site, second one is called as site to site, third one is called as express route. Okay, we will look into about each of these options in detail later, but for now understand that communication with help of Azure networking, communication with the resources outside Azure cloud is also possible. How it is possible? With by using these three services. Okay, now one more use of Azure networks. Okay, one more use of using Azure networks is basically, let me make a note here, is to filter network traffic. Okay, one more use of Azure VNets is filter network traffic. This is very important. Filtering network traffic is very important. How we can filter network traffic? By using two things. One is called as network security group. Second one is called as network security group. Second one is called as network virtual appliance. Okay, these are the two ways how we can filter the traffic that is coming to the VNets. How we can filter the traffic? By using network security group is one option. Second option is called as network virtual appliance. Now we will look into this each of these options. We'll create network security groups, we'll create virtual appliances, and we'll see how it happens. Now filtering is okay, but if I want to route the traffic, can I route the traffic? Yes, with the help of VNets we can also do the routing of the traffic. Now how to do the routing of traffic? Let's say route network. Okay, how to do the network traffic? There are multiple options here. By creating something called as, very simply you can say it as, by creating something called as route tables. Okay, and the second option is called as broader gateway protocol routes. Okay, these are the two options that we have if we want to do the routing of the tables. Okay, these are the multiple use cases of networking on Azure. Okay, first thing is that it will, with the help of VNets we can establish communication between multiple resources which are there on Azure. Second one, the communication between the resources which is there on premises and on Azure cloud, it is possible with the site to site VPN, point to site VPN, Azure Express route. And third one, if we want to filter the traffic, it happens with the help of network security group and network virtual appliance. If we want to decide the routing of the traffic, we can decide the routing of traffic by using route tables and broader gateway protocol routes. Okay, that is what which I have mentioned here. So basically, how to route traffic between Azure resources, etc., etc. We'll go each one of this topic in depth in the next coming chapters. All right. Now let us understand something called as a CADR. What is the use of CADR? Okay. Now let's say, okay, let's say I'm going to create a VNet. Let's consider this as a VNet. Now I'm going to create couple of virtual machines. Let's say these are the three virtual machines. Now when I create a VNet, now every virtual machine will get one public address, one private IP address, but let us limit the discussion to the private IP address as of now. Okay, this should get one private IP address. Now, what private IP address Azure will give for this particular server? It cannot decide randomly, right? So, when we create a VNet, we should give the range. Now, if you create a IP virtual machine, okay, in this VNet, okay, or in this VNet for this virtual machine, for this virtual machine, or for this virtual machine, what IP addresses should Azure define? So we have to give a range of IP addresses. Now let us say I can give something like, okay, you have to give the IP addresses, let's say 10.0.0.0, 10.0.0.1, 10.0.0.2, 10.0.0.3, 10.0.0.4, okay, 10.0.0.5. If I give a list like this, what it will do? It will take, okay, I'm creating a virtual machine. Let us use this because these all are available addresses, right? It will use first this one. If we create another virtual machine, it will use this. Okay, if we give another virtual machine, it will use this. Now it is easy for us if we have to give around 10-15 IP addresses. Now let's consider you have to give 1,000 IP addresses for this particular VNet. Can we make a list of all the IP addresses and give it to the system? It will be difficult, right? Then in that case, what we can do, we can define IP address range. We can define IP address range by using something called as CIDR. Okay. So by using something called as CIDR, we can define a IP address range. Now to understand what is CIDR range, let us understand a few things about a IP address. Now let's say this is an IP address 10.0.0.0. Okay. Now each IP address is a 32-bit IP address. Okay. It is a 32-bit IP address. And each, so now you see there is a dot that means 4 partitions, right? Each partition is called as octet. Now each octet is 8 bits. So this is 8 bits. This is 8 bits, this is 8 bits, and this is 8 bits. So that is how an IP address is a 32-bit IP address. Okay, this IP address is now 32-bit IP address. Now what is the meaning of 8 bits here? That means this IP address can be something like this. Let's say 1 0 0 0 0 0 1 2 3 4 5 3 6 7. Let's say one more zero. Okay, and this can be 0 0 0 0 0. Okay, and this 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8. 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8. Okay, now if I give an IP address like this, will I understand this? We want to convert that into a decimal format. Okay, now system stores everything in the value of ones and zeros, right? So if I give an IP address like this, the system cannot understand. So I'm converting that into a decimal value. So if you see here, only there are 8 bits. Okay, 4, 4. Every octet will have only 8 bits. That means it can only store this 8-bit address. Okay. Now this is a 32-bit IP address. Now let us say I want to, okay, so this is a 32-bit IP address. Remember this. Now let us say I'm creating a VNet. Let's say this is a VNet. Okay. Now in this VNet, I want to create 5 virtual machines. Okay, 5 virtual machines. Now I want to give a range in such a way that the starting two optics should be same for the VNet. Now what I can give to the VNet, I can give the range as 10 dot 0 dot 0 dot 0, let's say slash 16. So now what does this slash 16 determines? So 16 means 16 bit. So this is 8 bits. This is 8 bits. That means I'm saying that this 16 bits you reserve it. Make it static. That means don't change it. Rest it's up to you. Okay, this is the IP address range that I have given for this VNet. Now what will be the IP address that it will be given to this? So now this 10.0 should be static, right? So I have to give by default 10.0. It should start with that. And this one is up to me. Let's say I'm giving 1.0. For this, I'm giving 10.0.0.5. Is it correct? It is correct because this two I can give from 0 to 255. Okay, it can store up to 256, 0 to 255. So I can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 till 255. And this one IP address would be, it will be 10.0 dot 25.162. It is correct because this can go to 0 to 255. This can also go to 0 to 255. But this 10.0 should be static because I have told reserve 16 bits. And now this IP address could be 10.0 dot 45 dot 192. It is possible. Now let's say this IP address, can this IP address be 10.1.0.1? It is not possible. Why? The reason is because 10.1 is not. So when we given 10.0.0.16, I'm saying that make this two static, right? But it is not static. It is not. This IP address is not in the range of this range that we have given to the VNet. Okay, that is how we give IP address range by defining or by using CIDR range. Let us look into one more simple example to understand CIDR better. Let's say this is a VNet. Okay, in the VNet, I'm going to create 4 virtual machines. Okay, now I want to give what should be the private IP addresses to these 4 virtual machines. I only have to give the CIDR range. Let's say I'm giving the CIDR range as 11.0.0.0 slash 24. Now what does this mean? 24 means what? This 3 octets. This is 8, this is 8, this is 8. I want these 3 octets to be static. Okay, and I only have the availability to use these IP addresses from 0 to 255. Now what could be the IP address of this? It could be 11.0.0. It could be 10. Or for this, it could be 11.0.0.45. Okay, and for this it could be 11.0.0.62. It is quite possible, but it cannot be something like this 11.0.1.5. It cannot be there because the IP address range that I have given slash 24, the CIDR range, that means I'm saying put the 24 bits static. That is how you define an IP address range for a VNet by using a CIDR CIDR to give a IP address range to the VNets. I hope this is clear for everybody. Okay. Next, Let us understand something called as, okay, let us understand something called as subnets. Now, what is a subnet? What is the use of a subnet? Let us discuss about this. Now, let us say I have created a VNet. Okay, let's say this is my VNet. Okay. Now, in this VNet, I'm creating one a web server. Okay, and I'm also creating one, let's say, a database server. Okay. Now, basically, this is my VNet. Inside my VNet, I'm creating two servers. One is a web server, second one is a database server. Now, let's say we have given a CIDR range. The CIDR range is 10.0.0.0/16 is the CIDR range that I have given for this VNet. Okay. Now, because this is a web server, this should have public access. Okay. And this database server, I want to keep it secure. I don't want to give any public access to this database server. So that means what? This should be private. So we can clearly understand this is a public and this is private. That means these two servers requires two different types of rules. Then what I can do, I can logically separate, or let's say, okay, web servers also, I have two web servers. Two web servers. Now what, these two web servers has one kind of rule or one kind of permissions, and this database server should have a different kind of permission. Now how can I establish that? What I will do, I can logically group this two virtual machines into something called as a subnet. Now if I apply some rule on this subnet, that holds good for this one also, this one also. Now because there's a subnet for this, let me also create another subnet for this. So this is subnet 1 and this will be subnet 2. Now we have given a CIDR range of this, right? Now what I'll do, so this CIDR range means it is nothing but a range of IP addresses. Now let me give some IP addresses to the subnet, some IP addresses to this subnet. Okay, so the IP addresses that I want to give for this subnet will be out of this range only. Let's say I'll give 10.0.1.0/24. Okay, this one I'll give it to this. And let's say another IP address range 10.0.2.0/24. I'll give that to this subnet. So this subnet will use the IP addresses from this range. This subnet will use the IP addresses from this range. But the IP addresses that are going to come from this range and this range should be from the IP address range of a VNet. Okay. That is how we distribute IP addresses to a subnet. Now, this should have a, this is one server, this is one server. Now, by default, this server will get public private IP address, right? This will also get a private IP address. Okay, this is also getting private IP address. This is also getting private IP address. And this server will also get one private IP address. Now, this is very important thing that you guys have to understand. Now, how this server will get a private IP address? There is another hardware Okay, and again this is a virtual hardware. Even every laptop, every server will have this something called as network interface card. Okay, so once we create a server, any server, there is also something called as network interface card which is created, and this network interface card will actually have the private IP address. Now if I want this server to be accessed by public, I need to create something called as a public IP address, and that public IP address has to be assigned to this network interface which is having a private IP address. Then this particular web server will get public access. Okay, the concept that I want you guys to understand, let me put that in a new image. Let's say there is a VNet. Okay, inside a VNet there is a subnet. Okay, inside a subnet I have created a virtual machine. Now this virtual machine, one another component will be added to the virtual machine, that is called as network interface. Once the network interface is added, this network interface will have a private IP address. Now if this server, if it should have a public access, then what we need to create, I mean, once we give a public access, automatically a public IP address is created. Now a public IP address is created, and that public IP address is connected automatically to this network appliance. Okay, that is how the communication will be. That is how, let's say, if a user is sitting outside Azure network, with the help of either RDP or SSH, okay, he can connect to this server with the help of this public IP address, either through RDP or SSH. Now let us say there is another subnet. Okay, there is another database. Okay, there is another server. This is a database server. Now obviously this database server, for this also there will be a network appliance. For this also there will be a private IP address, and if it has to communicate with this particular server, this network interface can communicate with this. Okay, so the communication will happen over a private network. Now if a user outside Azure, if he wants to connect, first he has to connect to the public IP address. This public IP address, again it is redirects to the private IP address, and the communication will happen. Okay, that is how the communication is established by using public and private IP addresses uh, with the help of cider range. Okay, now once we give the cider range will basically give you the IP addresses. Okay, cider range will define what is the IP address for this, what is the IP address for this. All right, let us do one thing. We'll discuss little more about IP addresses, but before discussing little more about IP addresses, let us go ahead and create our own virtual network. Okay, and give a cider range and create couple of subnets and create our own virtual machine. Okay, on our particular network that we created. Okay, now what we're going to do is that you see in this image, there is a VNet. So let's create one VNet like this. Okay, and let's create one subnet. Let's define a cider range for the VNet. Let's define a cider range for the subnet, and then let's create one virtual machine inside this particular subnet, and we will see the network interface that this particular virtual machine got assigned. Let me flip to my Azure console to do this hands-on exercise. I am on my Azure console here. Let me go to VNet. Okay, you see there's an option called as virtual networks. I already have one virtual network in a region called as ESTS. Let me create a new one. Select option create. I will choose the subscription as pay as you go, and the resource group, I will create a new resource group by name called as demo. Select option OK. And the virtual network name, I want to give it as my demo vnet. Okay. And the region, I'm specifying it as East US. That is fine for me. Okay. Now, if I go into the next step, it is asking whether this should be enabled for Azure Bastion. As of now, I don't want to do that. Enable firewall. No, I want to keep it simple as of now. Go to IP addresses. Now, what is the CIDR range? If you see this, it has by default taken as 10.0.0.0 for the particular subnet. But I don't want to give this. I want to change the IP address range. I want to give it as 11.0.0.0/16. Okay, I want this as the starting IP address. Size, okay, you see, I want to give it as slash 16. So with this, you can see this particular, okay, it has taken the IP address range as 10.0.0. For this. Okay. Uh, so I want to delete this. Add an IP address space. Okay, by default, it is taking the available IP addresses. That should be fine. Okay, I'll use the available IP address as first IP address as this, and I'll give the range as 16. Okay, this is overlapping. Let's do one thing. Let's cancel this. Okay, let me go here and I'll say delete address space. Okay, now I will add my own address space. Now I can give it as 11.0.0.0. Okay, slash, let's say 16. Okay, now you see this has accepted. Select enter. And now you see this many IP addresses I can get in this particular range. Now let me add a subnet. I'll say subnet template. What is the subnet name? I'll give the subnet name as web server. Okay, and the starting IP address is this. Okay, it is taking /24. I can also give like this. Okay, that means 24 means 11.0.1 should be static. So now it is saying that the starting IP address will be this, the last IP address will be this. Okay, and you can get around 256 IP addresses in this particular range. I don't want any NAT gateway, security gateway as of now. We'll see that later, and select option add. If I want to add another subnet, let's say I want to add a database subnet as well. Let's go add here. Okay. Now the subnet name is, I'm saying it as database subnet. Okay. Now let me give the IP address range for this as 2.0. Okay. Now all the servers will get IP address in this particular subnet starting with 11.0.2. Okay, and you see this will be the starting IP address and this will be the ending IP address. So in this particular VNet, I'm going to create two subnets. One is a web server, second one is a database server. Now select option, review and create. Now basically a virtual network is getting created here. Select option, create. See, the deployment is in progress. This would take another 30 to 40 seconds. Yeah, you see the resource is created. Now, if I go into this network, my VNet name is called as my demo network. If you see connected devices, obviously there will be no devices. If we go into the subnets, we can see there are two subnets. One is web server, second one is a database server. Now you see, I told you about something called as service endpoints, peering, etc. Right? We will see, look into those things in the upcoming chapters. All right, now we have a VNet that is created and subnets are also created. Let me create a virtual machine now. Let's go to virtual machines. Now select option create a virtual machine. Same resource group is fine for me. Resource group will be demo and virtual machine name is demo for VNet. Some random name I'm giving. Now go to disks. Now you see in the networking, you see my demo VNet and other VNets are there. But the VNet that I created just now is called as my demo VNet, right? So let me select my demo VNet. Now if I scroll down here, there are two servers. Sorry, there are two subnets. It is showing web server also, database also. Now which one you want to give? Okay. Either I can choose a subnet which is a web server or a database. Let me choose a web server. And you see public IP address, automatically it is getting created. Okay, rest all I will leave for defaults. Okay, and then review and create. Okay, select option, create. That's okay, I don't want it because I'll not log into this server anyways. I'll create a username here. Review and create. Right now, let me select create again. This would take about a minute for the virtual machine to be created. The deployment is getting submitted. The deployment is in progress. Okay, now you see the couple of components which it is creating. We will discuss that once this is created. Now the resource is created. Let me go to the resource now. Okay, this is a virtual network, right? Now, you see this is having one private IP address and public IP address. Now, who is having this public IP address? This network interface. Now, if I go back to this image, what I told you, okay, I told you that let's say in a VNet, let's say if this is a VNet, okay, inside a VNet, we'll have a subnet. Inside a subnet, we have a virtual machine. Okay, this virtual machine, by default, it will get one private IP address. And if it has to be public, there is a network interface that is created, and that network interface will have a public IP address. So this server can be accessed over internet. Now, if you see this, you see there is a network interface that is created, which is this, and this network interface have an IP address. Okay, you see this is a network interface. Okay, we can create multiple interfaces. We'll discuss that later. But as of now, this network interface has a public IP address. Now you see this also has a private IP address, and it is there in the range that we have given 10.0.1.4. Now let us say go to virtual machines, select option create a virtual machine. Okay, let's say I will choose the same demo as the resource group, virtual machine for database. Okay, that's the name that I have given. It's a simple name. Okay, I'm giving username, password. Okay, go to next. Next. Now here in the public IP address, if I mention none, okay, I'm creating a new server, and in the public IP address, I have mentioned as none. Now let's say I want to put this on a, let's say, database subnet. Okay, and then review and create. Let us see what happens. So ideally, because we are not giving any public IP address, there should not be any network appliance that should be created, right? For this, for the previous uh, virtual machine, there's a network appliance that has created, and this has a public IP address. Now, what I'm creating a virtual machine, I don't want to make it public, so this should not be created ideally. Only I should be there, private IP address should be there. Let's see that. Now, the deployment is in progress. It is submitting the deployment. It will take about another 15 to 20 seconds. Okay, now the resource is created. Let me go to this resource. Now, if you see this resource, does it have a public IP address? It does not have any public IP address, and it has only the private IP address. So that network appliance is not created for this. So that means this particular server, I cannot or will not be able to communicate outside Azure cloud. Okay, we can only communicate inside Azure cloud. Okay, that network appliance which provides public IP address is not created for this. Okay, that is a difference. If a virtual machine, if it has to communicate outside Azure cloud, it should have a public IP address. And who gives the public IP address? You can say a network appliance gives a, sorry, it is network interface. A network interface gives a public IP address. Okay, this is a network interface, and this network interface has a public IP address. All right. And now IP address is automatically creating, right? So we can also create IP address by our own public IP address. Now let's say public IP address. Now click on this public IP address. You see there's already one public IP address which got created. Now let's say I want to create a public IP address. Select this option create here. Okay, and I want this to be in the same resource group. Now it should be in the east to west. I'll say demo IP for public. This is the name that I'm giving. Now this IP address could be IPv4 version or IPv6. Now there are SKU which is of two types. one is basic, one is standard. So basically, this is for pricing. If I go for basic, okay, I can make a public IP address static as well. Okay, if you make dynamic, there's a different cost. If you make it static, there's a different cost. Okay, standard, we can have multiple availability zones. That means we will get high redundancy. Okay, if I choose standard. Okay, basic is fine for me, and uh, you can make it either basic or static, whatever you want, and then review and create. Now this public IP address is created. Now next time when I create a virtual machine, instead of choosing a default IP address, I can give this IP address. Now let us see once this IP address is created. Okay, now the deployment is in progress. The IP address is getting created. Okay, it is created. Now let me go to this resource. This public IP address is 52.255.136.118. Okay, now let me go home here, go to virtual machines. Let's say create a Azure virtual machine. Okay, let's say virtual machine name, some random virtual machine name. I'm not going to create this, but I'm just going to show this to you guys. Go to networking. Now you see it is automatically creating a network, but we can also choose whatever virtual network it should be there in. I'm choosing this virtual network name, and it is automatically creating a public IP address. But if I want to give the public IP address which I have created, I can use this. Okay, that is how you can create your own public IP addresses with multiple options, whether you want to keep it static or you want to keep it dynamic, you want a basic one, advanced one, etc. Okay, so that is how you can create public IP addresses as well. So now let me wrap up the session. Let's see what we have learned. Now we have understood what is a VNet, and we understood what are the things that we can establish with VNet. We understood basics about CIDR range, how to give a CIDR range to a VNet and a subnet. We understood what are subnets, what is the use of subnet, and we also understood about what is a private IP address, what are public IP address, and we also understood about uh, network interface. Okay, we also understood about, let me put it here, it's about network interface. All right, and we also did another hands-on lab creating a public IP address. All right, that's all I have for this session. Hope you guys have enjoyed the session. You guys have a good time. Take care.